Hello everyone, welcome back. Today we're gonna do a Palmer 80 debugging video. Okay, so this comes from a interesting question that I was asked earlier today in my P80 building group. The name of that is, it's a Facebook group. It's called Building Palmer 80s because of, and then it's freedom. Okay, so if you're into gun building, you should join that group. There's it's a Facebook group. We have lots of interesting and useful conversation in there where you can even upload your own videos and people can look at what you're doing and help you out. But anyway, the issue that the person was having is that the gun was manually cycling, right? They could basically manually do this, press the trigger, and it would go click, right? So that seemed to be working pretty good when they were manually, testing it. They could actually hold down the trigger, cycle the gun, and they would get a proper reset. So all that was working fine. It's just that when they were shooting the gun with live fire, with live ammunition, the gun would fail to reset. Okay, so this problem was happening only while they were, while they were actually shooting. And what I suspect that the problem was had something to do with the engagement. Okay, which means that when you press the trigger, I'm gonna take this apart so you guys can see better. So when you press the trigger, right, you see how that, let me get behind the camera, make sure you guys can see. There you go. So you see when I press the trigger, right, you see that this thing right over here, right? So that's the sear at the back of the cruciform. You see how it comes back and down? Okay, so as it comes back and down, what it's doing is it's grabbing onto the firing pin lug over here, right? Where are you? Firing pin lug, it's pulling this back, okay, and as it drops down, it releases it. So it comes back, drops down, releases it. Now, as it comes back, the shark fin basically pushes on the safety plunger here, which allows the firing pin to move forward. So the action that is happening there is, as you press the trigger, the sear comes back, makes contact with the, with the firing pin lug, pushes it back, drops, releases it. Okay, so sear comes back because as you press it back, it kind of rises up, grabs it, pushes it back, drops it, releases it. So you're supposed to have like at least 75% engagement, right? So when you look at the back of the sear, at least 75% of it should be engaged. If anything, maybe just a tiny little bit of the bottom of that sear should not be engaged. I mean, I usually get 100% engagement, right? I want full engagement. When you rack the slide, and the way you do that is you basically when you take the an extra back plate, you just cut out this little area right here, right? You cut that out so that you can see through there. All right, basically that just covers what you want to be seeing. So you just basically cut this out, and then you'll be able to see the engagement when you rack the slide. Okay, so when you rack the slide, you want to see that engagement. In this position right here, right? So if you see that it's just like kind of holding, it's just like barely holding onto it, like instead of it being like this, it's like this. Yeah, you don't have enough engagement, and it's really not safe to carry the gun like that because, it's not like, it's not like that happen, but if the gun gets bumped, basically that can drop and the firing pin will go forward. It shouldn't set the round off, but theoretically under some weird circumstances it might. But anyway, you're supposed to have full engagement, or at least 75% engagement. I do 100% engagement. So the answer to this, right, normally is to bend, to put take out the cruciform, put it in the vise and bend it so that it basically comes up a little bit higher. So if it's normally sitting like this, you want to bend it up, or here, you bend it up so it comes up a little bit higher so you get full engagement. So the person that was asking about this, they said that they had Glock OEM parts, and and if that was the answer, they just bend it up to get full engagement. And I said, you know what, don't rush to do that, right? Because you got a Glock OEM part there. There's a good chance that there might be something else that's a little out of whack. Okay, maybe my understanding of what you explained to me is not full, complete, 100%. So before you start modifying Glock OEM parts, what I recommend is start swapping out parts. Okay, so if you've got a gun that manually cycles, right, you can hold it down here and you can go forward and it'll close all the way when you're holding the trigger down. All right, you know, and you can press the trigger if it's manually cycling like that. Before you start modifying parts, what you should have is extra parts, hopefully from different manufacturers, right? And just start swapping them out. So the first thing I would you know, switch with that is I just change out the whole trigger group and fire the gun, right? It's easy enough to switch out a trigger group in the Glock. Switch that out, see if you got the same problem. If that's not the issue, then the next thing I would do is change out the firing pin, the whole entire firing pin assembly. Change that out. See if the gun works. Right. Those are two really quick, easy things that you can do right there on the gun range, right, without too much hassle. Right. You just gotta punch the pins out. Just make sure you don't drop stuff. Punch the pins out. Switch out the trigger group. You know, see if it's gonna work. You know, take out the firing pin out of the slide, test that, you know, remove that, swap that out, see if that works. If it does work, now you've isolated the problems, right? Because basically what we want to try and do is isolate the problem. If you find that, okay, you swapped out the firing pin, you swapped out the trigger group and the gun is working fine, then chances now you want to maybe isolate it a little bit further. Maybe your cruciform is a little bit off, so maybe you can try swapping out cruciforms. So my point is, don't just start modifying parts, because here's the thing that might be off, and yes, the obviously the parts aren't matching up right, but remember, especially if you built the gun yourself, right? Like I built this one, there's probably more of a chance that the things that you built, like the frame, right, and the rails that you put in there's a good chance that they might be off a little bit, right? So there's probably a better chance, right? Maybe you know. So my point is, don't go modifying an OEM part. The best thing to do is have extra parts. Now, if you're into gun building, right, you should have lots of extra parts, right? You know, here I've got a whole bag full of triggers, right? These are all Glock triggers. So now obviously you don't need to have this many, but the point I'm trying to emphasize here is that if you're trying to build a gun, okay, you should have at least one extra trigger group, you know, at least one extra lower parts kit rather, and then at least one extra slide parts kit. But I've had issues because remember I've built lots of these. This is a small sample of different builds I have done, and I've had builds where the barrels were slightly out of spec. I've had builds where even the slides, you know, were a little out of spec. Sometimes the Cerakoting, right, with these guns over here, you know, they Cerakote them, right, because the paint that you see on these guns is not done the same way as, let's say, a Glock, you know, paints their guns, right? They use a special process to apply the coloring on their slides. They almost kind of like almost electroplated in, where it doesn't add material. Well, with all these aftermarket slide companies, right, when they color the slide, they're basically painting over it, so they're adding material that adds to the thickness, and as part of the break-in period, right, where you're typically shooting 200 to 300 rounds to break in the gun. What happens is the paint actually rubs off at the points where this gun makes contact, right? So like in the rails over here, right? So if there's any point of contact, that paint is going to come off. So the point I'm trying to say there is that there's lots of things that can be a little bit off. But don't go modifying Glock OEM parts. My first step would be to swap in other parts, right? And if I'm going to modify, if I'm going to modify, let's say, a cruciform where I'm going to bend it up a little bit, I'm not going to do that with Glock OEM. I'm going to grab one of these, I don't know, K&M tactical triggers, right? Or Carrots. This one's from Carrots. I would basically, if I'm going to modify or try to bend it up, if that turns out to be the actual solution, right? Because maybe because of the way that this came together, maybe the rails are sitting a little bit higher or whatever. If that turns out to be the solution where I need a cruciform where the sear is a little bit higher, yeah, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do it with one of these. All right, I'm not going to start experimenting with the most expensive parts group out there. I'm going to start experimenting with the cheaper one. So So I just wanted to put that out there. This is an important part of gun building, right? Especially if you're building the frame or the receiver yourself. Expect that there's gonna be some trial and error. You're gonna need extra parts to swap in. All right. Now, when they build these parts, there's always like tolerances, right? So what that means is that when Glock designed these parts, they gave a little bit of wiggle rooms. And the equivalent of that is, let's say you got a piece of plywood that's supposed to be, let's say, 6 foot tall, right? All right. So it's supposed to be exactly 6 foot tall, but in reality, that plywood may be 1/8 of an inch shorter or 1/8 of an inch longer. And if you've ever done any carpentry work, you know that, hey, if it's 1/8 of an inch longer or 1/8 of an inch, you usually don't even have to modify it. You can get it to fit. You can make it work without even worrying about trying to put like a shim in there to make that plywood a little bit longer, or needing to cut down the plywood, cut it down by that 1/8 of an inch. Usually there's a carpenter is able to get it to fit without modifying it. But I just wanted to explain to you what the tolerance is, right? So even though a piece of plywood is supposed to be exactly 6 foot, it is almost always not exactly 6 foot. It's always going to be, up to 1/8 of an inch longer or 1/8 of an inch shorter. Well, the same thing goes with all these gun parts, right? They're supposed to be, when they give specifications, they allow for tolerances. It's supposed to be this, but it can be a little bit this way or a little bit that way. So that's, a lot of times that's going to give you some issues. It usually should not, okay? But if you've got, one set of parts that are at one end of the tolerance extreme and another set of parts that are the other end of the tolerance extreme, now because they're the opposite ends, now you have like this tolerance stacking problem, right, where the extreme tolerances are now really starting to become an issue. So I just wanted to put out that the main point of this video was really not how to fix that one example that I showed you with regards to an engagement. The point of the video was basically to let you guys know that once you get a build working to the point where you can manually cycle it like this, right, and you can hold down the trigger and you can let it go forward, right, and when I let it go forward, it doesn't get hung up, it closes fully, okay? If you're having problems when you're shooting it, it might be related to the tolerances, and the easiest, cheapest solution might be to just have extra parts and just start swapping them in and figure out which is the part that's like that doesn't fit well with the others. Okay, so thanks for watching. I'll talk to you all soon.